Trying to find the darkest parts of the Nazi rule of Europe is like looking for the hottest part of the sun. Also, the Nazis' 6-year rule of terror over Europe was so bad on so many levels, from small crimes to mass crimes affecting millions of people, that it's kind of awkward to pick the worst. And while there are many horrible acts, some stand out because they are so rude and violent that they deserve extra attention even now. Babi Yar. The German attack of the Soviet Union in 1941 got off to a great start. In the first few weeks, whole Soviet forces were smashed and forced to run away in a mess. During that summer, Soviet forces from units that had been destroyed slowly made their way back to the front line as the fighting ended. A lot of guys who had to leave their homes had to walk hundreds of miles through newly taken over land just to find a Soviet unit that was still together and ready to work. All along the way, German security units called Einsatzgruppen, or special task forces, were threatening Soviet troops from behind the lines. Their job was to kill and deport people. These groups were active in Poland the previous year, but before the attack, they got a lot bigger and more power. By September 1941, the Red Army had to give up Kiev. As a result, hundreds of German soldiers and leaders died in the mines that were left behind after the city was cleared. To get back at them, Einsatzgruppe C started searching the area for partisans. They began with Jews. Several thousand Jewish people who lived in the area had already been rounded up as part of a larger plan to get rid of political and racial enemies. This move, however, was different. The Germans put up signs all over Kiev on September 26th, telling all Yids in the area to pack small bags and come to a new home. To their surprise, well over 30,000 Jewish civilians showed up on the morning of September 29th. The Germans thought that only about 5,000 people would follow their orders. The Germans put them on trucks or made them march to Babi Yar, a gorge near the city that was so bad that it was famous even in the Third Reich. People were forced to lie down on a bed of bodies in a 45-foot deep ravine while a German with a submachine gun shot them in the necks. They had to drop their bags, valuables and clothes before being led into the gully. The killings took 2 days and killed 33,771 Jews, according to the report written by the German leader, Paul Blobel. Then the walls of the valley fell apart, burying the bodies beneath the loose soil. The terrible things that happened at Babi Yar didn't end with the events of 1941. Early the next year, the SS built a concentration camp nearby to hold Romani and Soviet prisoners of war. Many more people, between 50,000 and 100,000, mostly civilians, would die at Babi Yar in the end. After 11 months, when the front was shifting and the Red Army was moving forward, hundreds of Soviet prisoners were forced to dig up more than 100,000 dead bodies that were starting to rot. Headstones from the nearby Jewish cemetery were used to build cremation pyres, and about 90% of the bodies at the spot were burned. After 40 days of digging and setting things on fire, the almost 350 prisoners rose up and tried to escape all at once when they felt it was their turn. Almost 12 made it through the escape. Lidic. This was Reinhard Heydrich, SS Obergruppenführer, in the spring of 1942. He was the face of Nazi terror in Europe. Heydrich was the perfect Nazi race model. He was tall and blonde, and his hands were thin and spidery. His eyes were icy blue. Besides that, he was the SS general in charge of the Gestapo, counterintelligence, and killing activities in the East. He got a new job as Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, the rump state that the Germans had made out of Czechoslovakia near the end of 1941, while they were still planned the final solution. In May 1942, British intelligence and the Czech government in exile killed him because he was so good at putting down the Czech resistance. The Nazis' response was to be very cruel, rounding up and shooting thousands of Czech citizens. There were hundreds more that were found and sent to death camps with their families. In particular, the local Gestapo was angry at the small town of Lidice and wanted to destroy it completely, even though it had nothing to do with the murder. Hundreds of German soldiers circled Lidice in the morning of June 9, 1942, and searched the nearby fields for anyone who might still be alive. They made all 173 men in the village over 15 years old march up to a wall and were shot there. The soldiers also took the town's 184 women and their children and took them to Ravensbrück, where about 100 of them died. 4 of the women were pregnant and were forced to have abortions in the same hospital where Heydrich died. Soldiers chose which children to kill based on their race. The blonde ones were given to German families under fake names, while the other 82 were gassed in killing vans at Chelmno. After the war, only 17 kids were still alive. It was their plan to burn down, blow up with explosives, and level the village of Lidis and the nearby village of Ležáky, where similar horrible things happened. The Germans killed even the farm animals. After the war, a new Lidis was built close to the old one. Every year, an international art competition for kids takes place there. The Warsaw Ghetto. As soon as the Nazis lost Stalingrad in 1943, things were going to get worse for them. People in charge of the occupation put the blame on the Jews. Around 400,000 Jews were locked up in a 1.3 square mile area of Warsaw starting in October 1940. The area was then walled off and watched over by armed guards who could shoot at will. There were stops along the way to the Treblinka death camp for about 350,000 people who had been sent from the Warsaw Ghetto to almost certainly die at the camp. The final killing began on January 18, 1943, when the Germans launched a huge raid that ended in a street fight. The SS and Wehrmacht killed the last of the nearly 60,000 people who lived there on April 19th, one day before Adolf Hitler's 54th birthday. They had been slowly starving for almost 3 years on just over 1,000 calories a day. The Germans were in for a surprise if they thought it would be easy to beat the starving people. The people who lived there knew about the trains that left full and came back empty, and most of the older, more peaceful people had already been taken. People who were still there were mostly young and very determined. They had spent months sneaking guns, pistols, and grenades into the neighborhood. They caught the Germans by surprise and killed or hurt many of them. The Germans went back to think about what they could do. Things got back to normal the next day, with SS Major General Jürgen Stroop in charge. Over the next 10 days, the Jews who were still alive in Warsaw made the Germans send thousands of soldiers and cops into the ghetto to fight. They moved from building to building. The fact that there were so many people living in small spaces actually helped the resistance. There was someone in almost every room who was heavily armed and ready to die fighting. In his report on what happened, Stroop praised the women of the ghetto for how they walked up to the police barricades with their hands up and yelled that they wanted to submit, only to pull the pin on a grenade at the last second and throw themselves at the nearest Germans. At one point, German troops set fire to an apartment building with several floors to get rid of the partisans who were hiding on the upper stories. The attackers jumped out of windows and fell 4 stories, killing themselves. They didn't want to be taken alive. Hand-to-hand fighting in the tunnels stopped around April 30th, which was the end of major resistance. According to Stroop, 56,065 people were identified as being from the area who had been killed, hurt, or taken. His count was off by a few thousand people. Small groups of people fought back for months longer, and when the Red Army reached the Vistula River the next year, the whole city rose up in protest. In response, the Germans used dynamite to attack every block of the city. By the time Warsaw was freed in January 1945, an amazing 94% of its people were either lost or known to be dead. Stroop took 42,000 Jews alive and sent most of them to the Lublin death camp. Another 7,000 were sent to Treblinka. Cleaning out Treblinka. The people who lived through the Warsaw Uprising got to Treblinka at the worst possible time, The camp had opened in June 1942 to kill a lot of people, and it was almost time to close down a year later. As of the spring of 1943, most of the killing had moved to Auschwitz, which was a much bigger camp. The about 1,000 Jewish prisoners at Treblinka were told to dig up and burn about 800,000 bodies that were buried there. After the last body was dug up, the camp would be closed down, and everyone there knew what that meant. After they burned the bodies, all 1,000 prisoners thought they would be killed. A mass grave was set up right behind the main gas chamber. Big steam tools were used to remove dirt from the top of the grave. As soon as the mud was gone, workers ran down into the pit to remove the last of the canopy. At the same time, other workers broke bodies free and carried them up the ramp on wooden carts. In the east, officers from Einsatzgruppen came up with a way to burn a lot of people at once. A pile of bodies and 2x4 beams were put on top of each other. The pile was then soaked in oil, and more bodies were added once there was a good draft. It took too many wooden beams and not enough people for this method to work at Treblinka, and Germany was always running out of gasoline. He was a German expert on burning, and he came to the camp with a much cheaper way to do things. The plan was to burn the bad fuel with the good fuel. Someone dug a big hole and put concrete poles all over the bottom of it. The steel bars were put on top of the pylons and welded together to make a grill shape. The most flammable bodies would be at the bottom and the least flammable bodies would be at the top. There was already a small fire going under the steel beams, so no extra fuel was needed. For months, people who worked at Treblinka had to dig up rotting bodies, which were often in pieces, and sort them. When bodies have been breaking down for a long time, they release gases that can catch fire. This is why new bodies went on top of old ones in the crematorium. In general, women have more fat than men, and adults have more fat than older people. Children have the most fat, so that's how they were stacked. It was summer, and the fires were going every night. Allied planes even used them as checkpoints. On August 2nd, 1943, when the open grave was almost empty, the campers who were still alive took guns and bombs from the armory that was on site. After that, there was a murder, and about 300 prisoners were able to get through the fence while being shot at with machine guns across the minefield and into the woods. Later, about 200 were caught and killed in the search. A few dozen made it through the war and told their stories. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.